Greetings, traveler. I am Snapjelly, and I have been asked to talk about leather armor quite a few times already, and I figured it was time today. So, leather armor. Leather armor was used in history. You have, for example, boiled leather, which is making leather harder with water somehow. We're not quite sure how people did it in the Middle Ages. There are certain ways that people have figured out that you could make leather harder with water, but we don't know how they did it back then. But it is possible, and apparently it happened. And there's also, quite simply, the buff coat, for example, which is just a leather jacket, a really, really thick, hard leather jacket that eventually replaced the gambeson. Although this was in the Renaissance period, when plate armor became used less and less and less, people started using these buff coats. Although you could also wear your buff coat under your plate armor. There's also a description of that being done. So leather armor was used. Although, as people usually really underestimate the defensive qualities of armor, I think people really overestimate the defensive qualities of leather armor. Leather armor is something that you see quite often in movies and video games and things like that, and I think in movies it makes a lot of sense because leather is easier to manipulate than steel is. Giving an actor leather armor is in a lot of ways more comfortable than having him wear steel armor, so it kind of makes sense. And in video games you usually see that leather is kind of like the light armor version of steel, which would be the heavy armor version of whatever type of material you would use. And it's not completely untrue, but it's still kind of untrue. There are simply some problems that using leather has, and comparing that to the gambeson. Now, first off, I want to say that I use leather for certain things. I use leather to buff up already padded armor during HEMA. Because if you have, for example, very light padded gloves, even if your sword is dull, that still hurts your knuckles. So I use this. I honestly can't tell you what type of leather it is, but it's really hard. It's half a centimeter thick. And I use this to buff up lightly padded armor, so that if a strike from a dull sword, so a light, dull weapon incoming, the leather, it breaks the momentum of the blow, and the padding is what actually protects you. Leather does have some defensive qualities, but there are two main things that you must understand. One is that there are incredibly different amounts of leather. You have thick leather, thin leather, tough leather, soft leather, flexible, not flexible. They're all different kinds of leather. And also, if you want to have leather armor, something that you must understand is that it's not just leather. You need to actually make it into armor. You can't kill an animal, get the leather, make it the shape of your body and say, now I'm armored. That doesn't work. See, the leather armor that the common soldier would wear, that is not armor. That is just a thin slab of leather, and that doesn't do anything. Calling that armor would be the same as me calling my shirt armor. The only thing that this has in common with armor is that it covers my body, but it does not protect me whatsoever. Just leather is not armor. Now, the largest problem that I have with leather as armor is because I've already expressed my general distaste in using leather as a type of armor. The largest problem that I have with it is how it interacts with blades. Yes, let me explain. Leather is quite easy to cut. You see, if that leather, I just cut with quite an ordinary knife. And the thing is, leather is quite easy to cut. And if you look at a sharp edge from a blade and you put it under a microscope, look at it in a microscopic point of view, now what you see is that it's actually a saw blade. It's just very small. But it has little hooks like that. That's how knives work. Now, leather can be quite easily sawed. But fabric is not easily sawed. It's quite easy to cut leather, and it's not that easy to cut fabric. In fact, if you see cutting tests, done with just a very thin layer of fabric in between the target and the blade, then the damage that the blade does is reduced in an incredible amount. Now, why is this important? Well, let me explain. A lot of times the fabric doesn't break. right? Now, if you have leather, even if the leather is hard and tough enough to withstand the blow, you could say, oh, well, that's armor, yes. But whatever weapon you use does cut into the leather. And if leather breaks, you can't fix it. There's nothing you can do to fix leather armor. The only thing you can really do is put another patch of leather over it, which would just increase the mass of your armor, and then eventually you're gonna have to throw away the entire thing because you can't use it anymore. Or you could sew it up, I suppose, but then still that hole is still gonna have a weak point because you're just poking holes into the leather with whatever type of string you would use, and that can simply rip open again. It's never gonna be as strong as it was before. But if you have a gambeson, which is already made out of fabric, so it's harder to cut in the first place, and if you do manage to cut that, or your opponent cuts open your gambeson, then all you have to do after the battle is stuff the stuffing back and sew it up. And it would be literally the same as it was before. Gambesons are very easy to fix, whilst leather is not. And that is quite a huge problem, because if you have to just replace your armor completely every time you use it, that is troublesome. Also, something that you must understand is that it's not like you don't have to look after leather. Leather still needs to be, how do you say that in English? Invetted. I don't know. Let me look it up. Greased. I don't know if that's right, but leather needs to be greased up. Otherwise, it gets very brittle. It rips easily. It gets tough, less flexible. And if anything, what you want from your leather is that it's flexible. So yeah, you have that, and you don't have to do those things with a gambeson. So I probably still pick a gambeson. You could use leather as a type of armor. You can make leather into very effective armor, but you must understand the basic fundamentals of what I'm trying to say is just leather is not armor. You need to make it into armor for it to be armor. Alright, now, I want to say something else in this video, something that is exceptionally horrible that every movie seems to do for some reason, and that is studded leather. Yes, if you don't know what studded leather is, well, it's quite simply if you have a piece of leather, like this, picking this again, and somewhere during the leather armor that the character is wearing, there would be a metal pin, stud, whatever, knob, somewhere on the armor that he's wearing. Yeah, this is useless. Studded leather is something that happens in fantasy all the time, and I honestly don't get it. Studded leather does nothing. Well, I've just explained that leather can be very effective armor. It can be armor. But the studs are incredibly useless. Now, arguments that people have made for studded leather against me is usually, well, maybe an incoming blade gets stuck on one of the studs, so it increases the chance of your armor actually blocking a blow. Well, no, it doesn't. What happens is a blade collides on a stud is it will just slide off and still dig into the leather. That's not going to do anything. And even if it doesn't, then still that stud is going to be poking into your body. You should understand that the stud is metal, right? And if a blade with anything with impact just collides on that stud, then that stud is going to poke you. That's not going to be comfortable at all. The studs do nothing. They absolutely do nothing. And, well, they look cool. I suppose. I don't think so, but I guess people think that they look cool. And that convinces people that it's armor, right? And instead of just normal clothing, it's, oh, that's studs, so now it's armor. Because that makes sense somehow. I don't get that either, but whatever, I'm not a movie director. I think that about sums it up. There are various different types of leather. There's all kinds of things that you can do. It's honestly, I can't just talk about leather armor as a thing. That how do you leather armor? I can't explain to you. There are various ways to create effective leather armor. But just leather is not armor, and studded leather is useless. Using studs in your leather by means of protection is the same as saying, oh, I'm protected because I have a nipple piercing. It doesn't do anything. That nipple piercing is not going to save you, but it might be metal, but it's not going to save you. Right? Studs are stupid. Okay, that's about everything I wanted to say. You can click the lovely round button in the screen to subscribe. Also, don't forget to like it if you liked it, and follow me on Facebook, facebook.com/snapjelly, link in the description below. And thank you for joining my quest, and I hope you'll join me in the next one. Bye, guys. Bye-bye.